Welcome to the Holocaust Center for Humanities Lunch and Learn program. I'm Alana Cohn-Kennedy, the CEO of the Holocaust Center. As people are logging in, please take a moment to let us know from where you are joining in the chat. This Lunch and Learn program wraps up our public programming for 2025, and what a year it has been. A few highlights. Over 30,000 students across the state of Washington used materials from our Holocaust Center this past year. The Holocaust Center also provided materials to 50% of the school districts in Washington state. Thousands of visitors walked through our museum's doors this past year, especially to see the exhibit on Anne Frank. And this fall, we were voted the best museum in the Seattle Times Best in the Pacific Northwest. And we offered 9 Lunch and Learn programs, which attracted viewers like you who are local and also who are joining from across the country and sometimes even from other parts of the world. We appreciate your comments after each program, which remind us how eager this community is to learn, to be connected, and to challenge themselves with different perspectives. In fact, I was so fortunate to meet one couple who had been watching these Lunch and Learn programs for years. This has been their main point of engagement with the Holocaust Center. They recently notified us that they have added the Holocaust Center to their wills so that they can continue to have an impact on our work. This past week, I got to meet this lovely couple in person. And if you are watching, you know who you are. Thank you so much. They join our dedicated legacy circle, which is a group of individuals who have included the Holocaust Center in their estate plans. If this is something you are interested in learning more about, please let us know. We are so grateful for this long-term support with an eye towards the future, the next generation, and sustainability. For our last Lunch and Learn program of 2025, we are fortunate to have with us author Kenneth Wald. Ken is the son of Holocaust survivors. He spent most of his career as a political scientist at the University of Florida. He has also spent his career as a sought-after professor, serving as a visiting scholar at Harvard, the University of Michigan, and University of Toronto, and he has lectured at universities in Israel, England, Canada, Scotland, Sweden, and China. The story of his paternal family's encounter with the Holocaust, entitled The Ghosts on the Wall, A Grandson's Memoir of the Holocaust, was published in November 2024 and was a finalist for Best Memoir in the Next Generation Indie Book Awards in 2025. Ken joins us today from Florida. We will have time at the end of his presentation for questions, but please type in your questions at any time into the Q&A on Zoom. Ken, thank you so much for being with us today for this Lunch and Learn program.
Well, thank you very much, Ilana. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful opportunity for me and a real honor to speak to your audience today and to be part of the programming of your institute. I want to especially thank both Ilana and Cameron, the technical wizard of the organization, for helping me address some of the technical problems we had during our run through yesterday. Everything now appears to be working, and I'm grateful to them for that. I also want to give a shout out to 2 members of the audience who helped bring my work to the attention of the Institute. Eileen Putter, with whom I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska, of all places, also introduced me to Rolf Gruen, and they both helped to promote this event, and I'm most grateful to them for doing that. My interest in the Holocaust as a writer actually began some years ago when I was appointed as director of the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. I looked over our curriculum and I noticed that the vast majority of the classes we offered were about the classical period of Judaism, the Middle Ages, when Judaism as such achieved a certain status. But I didn't see very much there about modern Jewish history, and in particular, very little about the Holocaust. So together with another faculty member in the center, we created a Summer Holocaust Institute for Florida teachers, which we called SHIFT. which ran for several years. And our goal was to simply help teachers who wanted to include the Holocaust in their classes, but hadn't really been taught about it themselves. And that was a very successful undertaking. That eventually resulted in my appointment for about a dozen years as a member of the the Florida Commissioner of Education Task Force on Holocaust Education, where we worked on curriculum and other programming techniques to try to, again, better teach teachers and enable them to teach their students about the Holocaust. As a result of that encounter, I ended up giving a lot of talks about the Holocaust. And I learned at a fairly early date that the Holocaust is so vast, so all-encompassing, so evil, that it's very hard for many people to wrap their heads around what it is and what happened. And that has prompted me to think that Holocaust education often works best when it focuses on specific places, specific groups, and families like my own who experienced the Holocaust. And so when I retired from teaching at the University of Florida, I spent some time writing the book about the impact of the Holocaust on my family. And I'm going to be talking to you about their experiences during that time. I'm now going to open my screen, so excuse me a moment. It might take me to okay. Sound optimized. Okay, let's share. Okay. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble finding my PowerPoint. It's not showing up on my screen. Cameron, I'm wondering if you can help me at this point.
Hi, Ken. What if you stop share and then is your PowerPoint open on your?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I did it in the wrong order.
Yeah, that's all right. We'll just make sure the PowerPoint is open, then it will be easier to grab it.
There we go. Okay, let me just. Okay, again, thank you. My
Yeah.
apologies. As I mentioned, I have found the value of studying the Holocaust one family at a time, which counted. Sorry, I just need to get this. All right, I'll just stick with this. And
Sure. Do you want to share the PowerPoint now?
yeah, I'm trying to, but somehow there we go. Finally. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so
We don't, wait, Ken, we don't see it quite yet if you're sharing it.
yeah, I have to do that. All right, let me go back.
And it's open already on your computer, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm doing the slideshow option and from the beginning.
Yeah, and we don't see it yet, so just make sure to share screen.
Okay, let me go back. Sorry about that. Okay, are you seeing it yet?
Yeah, we're seeing it. Perfect. And then, yeah, you'll just need to put it in the slideshow mode and we'll be off and running.
Okay. All right, for some reason, there we go. Okay, good.
Perfect.
My apologies for the problem. I'm going to tell you today again about the story of a particular family, the Schonwald family in a small town in Germany. The word schön in German means beautiful, and Wald, which would be pronounced Wald, means forest or trees. So I'm going to be talking about my father's family, the Schonwald, and focusing on them between 1919, when they first moved to a small town known as Großröhrsdorf, through essentially the end of their experience during the war. There are actually two books about the family that have already been published. The first is the book that Alana mentioned, The Ghosts on the Wall, which was published during the Kristallnacht anniversary late last year in November. There's also a German language book entitled The History of the Jewish Family Schonwald from Großröhrsdorf. This was written by three men from the town of Großröhrsdorf. The principal author, a man named Norbert Littisch, was for many years the pastor, the Lutheran pastor of the town, and has done a lot, he with his two colleagues, in helping me learn about my family's experiences. There is also a play based upon the family, also called The Ghosts on the Wall, written by a teacher in Lincoln, Nebraska, which has since appeared in a number of places, Gainesville, Florida, Jacksonville, and some other communities as well. So let's go on to...
Welcome back to First at Four.
Okay. So the big question, of course, everyone has to ask in discussing what happened during the Holocaust is why such genocides happen. And it's worth keeping in mind that the term genocide was itself developed to describe the Nazi attack on the Jewish world. I think it's useful to think about different kinds of human relationships following the work of the distinguished philosopher and Austrian Jew, Martin Buber. Buber suggested that there were basically two kinds of human relationships. There was the first, which he called the I/it relationship. And this is really the relationship that seemed to dominate and lead to the creation of the Nazi attack on Jews. In an I/it relationship, there is a kind of detachment of the two partners, and their relationship essentially is transactional, involving a utilitarian approach. In a sense, in this kind of relationship, each user tries to, or each of the participants tries to use the other participant to achieve a particular goal. And this is often the way genocides take place. It's often the logic. But Buber also suggested a more perhaps important relationship called the I and thou relationship. And unlike the I/it relationship, each of the people in that relationship approaches the other with openness and what he called ethical engagement. Each participant in an I/thou relationship is concerned with the other person having a sacred quality to it, and consequently the honor and respect of the other, not just the usefulness of one to another, is of paramount importance. And much of Buber's work was to try to get people to understand how this relationship, the I/thou, leads to better outcomes than is true of the I/it relationship. What happened during the Holocaust, I would argue, using Buber's term, is that Jews were turned from a thou, an individual Jew or a Jewish community, were seen as not in any terms sacred. They were turned from that status into an other. And we have now developed a tendency to use the term, the word other, as a verb. So when one turns a thou into the other, in effect, they are othering the people who they do not like. And it's been discovered that during this process, a particular person or group is marked as somehow being different, and in many cases being unacceptable and negative and challenging and dangerous. This way of approaching the other helps the I person to develop an identity in which the other is not part of the world. It helps the eye to maintain power, to justify prejudice or discrimination. And in extreme cases like the Holocaust and like other genocides, the other is developed and described as a kind of human contaminant to society and should ultimately be excised from the body politic and the world in general. And as a commentator described Buber's approach, he said that the other becomes, in all diseased societies, sacrificial victims in the vain attempt to achieve moral renewal and recapture a lost glory and prosperity. In looking at the process that turns the thou into the other, I've generally discovered that there are three kinds of tactics that are employed by those who wish to take an other or thou and turn them into an out group. The first of these, and they're not necessarily in order, is what I call defamation. The group that is being constructed as the other, as dangerous, as hostile, is denied any kind of social honor. They are treated as if they have no virtue, and it's denied that they really have any worthiness in good society. So the goal is to simply reduce the image of the individual who is classified as the other. Defamation is often accompanied by demotion. And in this stage, the group that becomes the other is denied citizenship, as was true of Jews in Germany after Hitler came to power. They are also denied property, most of which is stolen from them, as happened to most people who experienced the Holocaust. And they are also denied any kind of social status or respect from their community. Again, something that is part of the process of making the other not simply undesirable, but an enemy that has to be treated as a dangerous force. And oftentimes this culminates in the process of dehumanization. The person is stripped nude of all human characteristics, is seen again as, in some cases, an insect or vermin with terms of that nature. And the very value of their lives is denied. And indeed, their life often ends because of that. So that's an overview to the idea of the genocide, how it works. In the case of Germany, there was essentially three steps that followed each other in the treatment of Jews by the Nazis. In the first instance, Jews were encouraged to leave Germany voluntarily. That is not really voluntarily in the pure sense of the term, but Hitler decided that he wanted a Jew-free Germany, and he wanted to drive Jews out. And the techniques that were used included depriving Jews of occupations. Many Jews had positions in the public sector as teachers, lawyers, or whatever, but they were either denied those occupations, that is, they were fired, or they were limited in their ability to practice them. So Jews could continue as doctors under the Nazis, but they could only treat Jewish patients. Jews could teach, but only in Jewish schools alone. They could not teach in state schools. So in a sense, the goal of this strategy was to encourage Jews to leave Germany, which Hitler felt would make Germany a better state. And this process essentially ran from 1933 to 1938. And it did result in a significant outflow of Jews from Germany to the countries around them, the Netherlands and other places. But it still left a significant share of Jews in the German state. Consequently, it was decided to increase the pressure on Jews to get more of them to leave the country. This particular step was inaugurated by the Kristallnacht pogrom, which occurred in November 1938, in which German property was attacked. German Jews were themselves attacked, in some cases killed, and the owners of that property, the business people, were sent to concentration camps, which were at this point still prisons. They weren't extermination camps. When many of the people who were arrested in Kristallnacht came back to their homes in Germany, they were drafted as slave laborers. And again, in many cases, their property was simply stolen without any compensation. Even though this might have been thought to get rid of most of the Jews, it did not do so because many of the Jews who lived in Germany simply had no place else to go. Much of Europe and most of the world, including the United States, did not welcome Jews into the country. And furthermore, the irony here is that Germany, in its military strategy as it advanced to the east, conquering the countries within Europe, ended up with responsibility for actually more Jews than they had previously had in the early 1930s. So at this point, they came up with the third and what was called the final solution. And that simply is that in early 1942, the plan of the Nazis was simply to kill Jews everywhere and anywhere. And at that point, to get out of Germany became almost impossible for most of the Jews. And again, the killing involved a variety of techniques. It's worth pointing out. The Nazis did not, well, certainly they had extermination camps. There was also a lot of killing that took place through mobile killing squads that went where the Germans had conquered parts of Eastern Europe. They would round up the Jews and they would simply use violence, murder to get rid of the population. So, that being said, let's talk about the Schonwald family. You see here on the screen a picture of Kurt and Regina Schonwald, my grandparents. There are things I will tell you about them. They were both born and raised in Berlin, and Kurt served in the German army during the First World War. In fact, if you look carefully on his lapel, you'll see a small military decoration, a ribbon. That ribbon was there to indicate that Kurt received, as a result of his involvement in the war, the Iron Cross Second Class, one of the highest honors conveyed by the German state on its soldiers. Ironically, that same award, the Iron Cross Second Class, was given to a young Austrian who had volunteered for the Jewish army. That man was known as Adolf Hitler. So even though he had something in common with my grandfather, that didn't achieve any protection for the family. The Schonwald family, as far as we know, first emerged in 1809. You see now on the screen a family tree which my father wrote when he was a high school senior. He claimed that he traced the family back 300 years, but the earliest person I can find on this document was in 1809. And you see there were, at this point, 4 generations still present in Germany. They had been there collectively for almost 150 years. And you will notice if you look at each of these entries that there was a space there to indicate the religion of the individual. And all of these people here were described in German as Jude, as Jews in the process. And the last member of that cohort was, again, here at the bottom, my father, Heinz Werner Schonwald, and his sister, Suze Schonwald. As I said, the Schonwalds did not move to Großröhrsdorf until 1919. Their firstborn son, who was born in 1918, died during the Great Influenza experience in 1918. And I suspect that prompted them to leave Berlin, where their memories were, and move to this small textile town of about 12,000 in the province of Saxony on the eastern border of Germany. Kurt, as I mentioned, was highly regarded and respected because of his military service. And in addition, he and his wife, Kurt and my grandmother, were also known for their generosity to the community and to customers. The first time I visited the town of Großröhrsdorf, I met an older man, and he told me a story about my grandfather. It seems that an employee in one of the textile factories in the town was caught up in the machinery that was being used and suffered grievous physical injuries. There was no hospital in the town of Großröhrsdorf, so the employees raced to the owner of the factory, told him what had happened, and asked him, because he had a car, to drive this man to the hospital in Dresden, the closest town. The owner apparently refused, and so the workers went to my grandparents, who had a car, and asked them if they would drive him, this injured man, to the Dresden hospital, which my grandparents did. And the man told me this is the sort of thing that the family was known for. There was a case where a pregnant woman came into the store. They had a department store, which I'll show you in a moment. And she was buying goods so she could sew. A great many women at this time in the town were seamstresses after World War I because they could make some money in a time of mass employment. My grandfather noted that the woman was, again, in advanced stage of pregnancy, and he insisted that he drive her home rather than force her to walk the distance. So the Schonwalds had a very strong and positive reputation. They also were said to be major contributors when the town decided to build what was called the public bath. After the war, again, Germany was in terrible condition, and it was difficult to even maintain basic hygiene. So the municipality built a public bath, which included both a large swimming pool, but also just bathing facilities for basic hygiene. And again, this apparently came out of the funds of the Schonwalds business. If you had asked Kurt and Regina about their life in the period after 1919, when they arrived in Großröhrsdorf, I'm sure they would have said they had a very good life. And the foundation of that life was their store, the department store. You see in the middle a picture of the Schonwald department store, known in German as the Kaufhaus Schonwald. And this was the largest, and I would argue the grandest building in this town of about 12,000. The basement, the ground floor and the first floor, which you see here, were fully occupied by the department store, which was really, to use a term that was used back then, a dry goods store. The upper floor contained both the family's residence, which was common in business at that time, but also a lot of spaces which were leased out to professionals. So there were offices of doctors and lawyers, architects and artists and the like. And this was, again, the picture of the town. And interestingly, this building survived the war without any damage, and it was restored after World War II, and it looks very much the same as you see in this picture. Well, the income from that enabled Kurt and Regina to travel. You see here on the left, they're on a burro in a cart in the area of Germany known as Saxon Switzerland. It was not in Switzerland, but it had similar topography with mountains and the like, and they could take vacations and enjoy that. On the right, you will see 3 of the 4 members of the Schonwald family they're in front of some sort of, I don't know if it's a cave or something of that nature, but something of a tourist site. You see my grandfather, Kurt Schonwald, standing at the base. And you'll notice that even though he's on vacation and it's summertime, he's, like most Germans, wearing a very well-maintained suit. And I've always seen him in ways that make me think of him as a bantam rooster who I probably wouldn't want to get in a fight with. Standing further up on this cliff is my father, Heinz, with whom I share a lot of physical similarities. And then on top is my father's sister, Sousa was her name. And again, they both the kids were able to travel around Europe thanks to the income. Heinz became the assistant director of the Schonwald store when he completed his education. Life was good until Hitler emerged into power. His story, I think, is well known. He started the Nazi movement, the National Socialist Workers' Party, and ultimately made anti-Semitism the key avenue of appealing to the German population. In 1978, one of the television networks in the United States broadcast a week-long series that was simply called Holocaust. I believe Gerald Green, the novelist, was the author of this. And the lead actress in this performance was none other than Meryl Streep. The synagogue in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I was born and raised, decided because of this to assemble a group of Holocaust survivors and talk about their experience in the Holocaust. And the first speaker was my father, then named Henry Wald, who talked about when Hitler came to power in Germany. And here's what he had to say about the reaction of the Jewish community.
Very briefly to go back, this all started, at least on the surface, in 1923 with Hitler's revolt, which didn't come off. Hitler went to jail, wrote his infamous book, Mein Kampf, and we, as the Jewish population of Germany, made the mistake of not reading it. I personally must plead that I was a little too young for this sort of thing, but nevertheless, my parents and relatives and so on didn't read it soon enough. We started reading it in 1933, 4, 5, or some such year, and by that time it was a little too late. Hitler came to power, actually, in January of 1933, and did precisely what he said he was going to do in the book which he had written while in prison.
You might wonder how the German Jews could have, in a sense, downplayed the importance of Hitler, given the fact that he was explicit in that he wanted a Jew-free Germany, as he often put it. So how, in a sense, did they not see what was coming? Well, my father had an idea on this as well.
Not a majority. Of course, my family, people whom we knew well, to us, this whole thing was not really serious. Whatever Hitler may or may not have had in mind, nothing was going to happen to us, we thought. For one thing, we were Germans. I have personally traced my family back some 300 years in Germany, and with a German mania for keeping records, that's not all that difficult. I was a high school senior when I did it. And there were any number of others who were in the same boat. I was born and raised in a small town of about 12,000 population. I went to school there, grade school, high school, went to university, and I knew all these people. They were friends of mine, so what were they going to do to us? Nothing. It didn't turn out that way. Very briefly, not go back.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the next stage in the Nazi attack on the Jewish community occurred in November 9th to 10th of 1938, when Jewish businesses were attacked. Jewish business owners, if they weren't killed, were sent to concentration camps, and much of their property was taken. My father tells about how this happened in the town of Großröhrsdorf to his father, and he claimed to himself.
Then along came November the 10th of 1938, also known as Crystal Night. On that day, a young Polish Jew walked into the German embassy in Paris and shot, I think, the secretary of the German embassy. I believe the man died a day or 2 or 3 later. I'm not really sure about that. But this was a signal for one of the best staged, spontaneous uprisings ever known. The local Nazi groups, the stormtroopers, both brown and black shirts, and the Hitler Youth and so on started demonstrating. Now, we were living in this small town, incidentally, the only Jewish family in what would be considered a county in this country. And my father belonged to an organization similar to the American Legion, you know, things of that kind. And my father and I were arrested. The term used was protective custody. Now, I'm sure to this day that we did not need any protection. These people, even though they were demonstrating up and down the street, and there was only one street, you know, this was a town 11 miles long and 2 blocks wide, we didn't need any protection, but we were arrested by, well, the chief of police. Well, the chief of police was a buddy of my father's. They had been together through World War I, and the chief of police son and I were fairly close friends. Our birthdays were 1 day apart, and I'm the older one. And he was dating my younger sister from time to time. So we were arrested, and the chief of police took us to the city jail, which was housed in the city offices, and was rather primitive, but it was clean. And he kept apologizing that he had to do this and so on and so forth. Well, during the night, we were picked up by a truck, and at this stage we were handcuffed. And we were taken to the next larger city, which was Dresden. You've heard the name. And from there we got on a train and were taken to concentration camp, Buchenwald. And that train ride is something that 40 years later I still remember.
There's more there that's I'll mention to you later, a place where you can read more of those comments. I should also point out that it is clear that my grandfather, again, Kurt Schonwald, was taken to Buchenwald. I do not believe that, in fact, my father was taken to Buchenwald. He was, I think, earlier sent to another concentration camp for another reason, but the grandparents were, my grandfather was there. Now, I mentioned to you before that the stage was prepared for these actions through the process of othering. And I'm sure many of you have seen pictures of German Jews who were arrested wearing armbands with a Star of David. This enabled Germans non-Jewish Germans, to identify Jews and seek them out, and they were often told that these were enemies and so forth and so on. But the way in which they othered people was sometimes even more diabolical. Here on the left side of the screen, you see a picture of Kurt Schonwald's birth certificate from 1880. And you'll note that he was given the name Kurt Bernhard Walter Schonwald. Well, after their store was stolen in the aftermath of Kristallnacht, they moved back to Berlin, where they had both been raised, my grandfather and grandmother. And they were able to get a telephone, and I actually went to the telephone directory for Berlin in 1939 because I was curious to see the listing. You will note here there are, just from this segment, 5 people named Schonwald. But you will note that only one of them, my father here is highlighted, was othered by having his middle name changed from Bernhard Walter to Israel. This was part of the laws known as the Nuremberg laws, which were designed to discourage Jews from staying in Germany. Any Jew who did not have a typically Jewish last name was required to, a name like Cohen or Ginsburg or Greenberg, was forced to take on a new middle name. And the names Bernhard and Walter disappeared from Kurt and he was required to have the name Israel as his middle name. A woman in that same situation would have to take the middle name Sarah. Again, this was another way of identifying Jews and making it easier to attack them as was needed. Now, I mentioned to you before that the Schonwald family contributed greatly, I was told, to the building of the new public baths, which were said to be the finest public baths in all of Saxony. But even there, the philanthropy followed by the Schonwalds didn't seem to do them any good. You see in this picture the entryway to the public baths in Großröhrsdorf. And if you look carefully, you can see here there are signs up on two of the windows. Those signs are in German, but they say in English, "No Jews or dogs allowed." So the Schonwalds, who had made this facility possible, were not allowed to enter into the place where their generosity had been so helpful. So the process of othering was, as I said, both, cruel by definition, but also, in a sense, diabolical. Kurt Schonwald was kept in Buchenwald concentration camp, where he was sent for about 3 weeks. And eventually he was told he would be released if and only if he sold the business, the Kaufhaus Schonwald, to a German who was not Jewish, a Gentile. And indeed, at the end of November, December 1st, 1938, the local newspaper announced the opening of the new store, the Kaufhaus Seifert. Kurt had sold the house to a Gentile named Kurt Seifert, who came from another town, and he simply substituted my grandfather's, his own name for my grandfather. Those of you who saw the picture of the Kaufhaus Schonwald will realize this is exactly the same location. I'm told my grandfather, in one of his letters to my father, who by 1939 was in the US, described Kurt Seifert as, quote, "that louse." He obviously didn't respect him. What apparently made my grandfather particularly livid was a feature of the Kaufhaus dealt with. Painted on the front of the Kaufhaus Schonwald was a sign that said Erbaut 1928 CS. This had been painted by a man, again, who designed the building. And it simply means built 1928, and then the initials CS for Kurt Schonwald. The fact that this name, the same initials, could be used without causing any expenditure for Seifert apparently just was what really upset my grandfather, not just losing the store, but that this louse, as he put it, didn't even have to pay any money to cover the sign. He felt that that sign was the symbol, the icon for the building, and it deeply upset him that he lost that business. Now, it's worth pointing out that Kurt eventually returned to Berlin. He and his wife saw no reason to stay in Großröhrsdorf, so they returned to Berlin, and they lived for several years. In 1942, Kurt was drafted as a slave labor by a major electrical company in Berlin, Erich and Gratz. And we know this because after the war, years later, somebody who was in the factory was cleaning out the old files, and he found a box of records. Those were identity cards for the German Jews who had been forced to work as slave laborers in the Erich and Gratz facility. Now, one of the things you can notice here, if you compare this picture of my grandfather with that portrait that I showed you along with his wife early on, and with the picture of him standing outside that cavern or mine or whatever it was. And you can see this is a very different person. He is not just older, it's clear from his expression that he may be sad, he may be confused, he may, in a sense, have kind of lost touch with reality. He's not wearing the same nice clothes that he used to wear, and it looks like he's, in a sense, been defeated. Interestingly enough, I was able to acquire the financial files for my grandparents when they were later deported, later in 1942. And I found that the Eric Gratz Company had a document that was in that file which said that they had employed Kurt Schonwald in 1942 to work in the company. Given what it was like to describe Kurt Schonwald as an employee when he was clearly a slave would be a lot like describing an African-American slave on an American plantation as an independent contractor. It was really outrageous that such a term was used. And the Nazis simply stole virtually everything the Schonwalds had. They did have enough money to go back to Berlin to set up an apartment, but most of their income was simply used by the state. It was very similar to organized labor in that the state always took a cut of anything. I should also point out that another thing that I think is really outrageous here is when Kurt sold the business, quote, to the Sieverts, the Nazis decided to engage in racist economics. The store still had parts of the original mortgage on it. And normally, as I think most people know, when you buy a home or a property, if there's a mortgage on it, the buyer has to assume the debt and pay for it. Well, the Nazis decided that the Schonwalds somehow ought to pay off the mortgage. And in doing that, there was basically very little money left to enable them to live. Now, my father, once he arrived in the United States, worked very hard to try to get his parents out of Germany. He, I think, just did everything that was humanly possible and more. But ultimately, and at that point, it seemed like there might be a happy ending. In November of 1941, my grandfather wrote to my father, who had now changed his name from Heinz Schonwald to Henry Wald, and told him two things that were very important. First, he wrote, my grandfather to his son, on the same day as your letter arrived here, a letter from the local Cuba embassy also reached us, saying that our immigration authorization has arrived. That was good news because it was much easier to get into the United States from Cuba than it would have been directly from Germany. So it looked like they would have a chance. And then, as my grandfather said, as soon as we get our passports here, we can get our ship tickets. We are waiting every day for the passports and are disappointed about the apparent delay. What my grandparents did not understand is that the Nazis had decided, as part of the final solution, to no longer issue passports to Jews. They would be trapped inside Germany. And those passports never arrived. And ultimately, of course, my grandparents were deported. I'm going to skip over the video with my mother, who simply talks about her husband losing his parents during the war. So, what happened specifically to Kurt and Regina? When I was in Israel, I went to the Holocaust memorial known as Yad Vashem, and I was able to find in the archives a transport list compiled by the Gestapo about sending Jews from Saxony to a slave labor camp called Troniki. There was also a ghetto there known as Piaski. And the first three names on this list are members of my family. The first one listed, Johanna Tzadek, was my grandmother's sister, my great aunt. And her husband, who was also Jewish, had fought for Germany in World War I and had been killed in action. One might have thought that what we in America would have then called a Gold Star mother, a Gold Star wife, would be exempted from this. But to the Nazis, it didn't matter. A Jew was a Jew regardless of what had been done. And Johanna was this one of the three members of the Schonwald family sent to Tranicki. Regina, my grandmother, was on that list, as was Kurt Schonwald. All three of them were classified as accompanied rather than being alone. For some reason, that was important for the Gestapo to know. What did my father actually know about what happened to his parents? Well, I have to go back to his arrival in the United States in 1939 and point out that he, the next year, signed up for military service. In June of 42, his number was drafted. But because he was technically a German citizen, even though he claimed he was not, he was required to fill out a questionnaire and explain his history to the draft board. I should point out that I obtained a copy of this from the Kansas City office of the National Archives. And the thing I want to mention to you is this point that he added an appendix to this questionnaire. And one of the sentences there read, "I received a letter stating that my parents had been deported sometime in April of this year from Berlin, where they used to live, to the address given. Thus, I have reason to believe," and just listen to this, "I have reason to believe that they may not be alive anymore, since I know that diseases are raging in that area, and besides, those people are not being fed by the Nazis." So it was clear to my father in mid-1942 that his parents most likely were not alive. And then he added a second paragraph that I think is equally revealing in that letter to the draft board. He said that to prove that I am definitely an enemy of the Nazis, I will only have to state that I am Jewish. I, for one, have a personal score to settle with the Nazis, which includes revenge for 3 weeks in a concentration camp where I was taken only because I am Jewish. I should point out that I do not believe he is referring to Buchenwald, where his father went after Kristallnacht, but to another incident in Großröhrsdorf, where he was denounced for having committed a race crime. That simply meant that as a Jew, he'd apparently had some sort of relationship or encounter with a non-Jewish woman, again, a Gentile woman, and that this was considered a crime. There was never an indictment against him, according to a search of the records in Großröhrsdorf, but to the Nazis, it didn't matter. A Jew was guilty just by virtue of being a Jew. And so Heinz was sent to a concentration camp in Dresden, where he engaged in hard labor for a period of time. That's the one that I think he is referring to. At the end of World War II, the reconstituted German government undertook a project to identify the fate of every Jew who had lived in Germany between 1933, when Hitler came to power, and 1945. I actually found the volume, and this is a large multi-volume collection of several hundred books. I found the one that contained my grandparents' name. And they listed the things you would expect. For my grandfather, when he was born and where he was born, the same thing for my grandmother. They indicated where he had lived, Dresden and Berlin, not Großröhrsdorf. Apparently, it was too small to be noted. They indicated on his record that he was interned or arrested in late November of 1938. I actually think that's when he was released from custody, rather than when he was arrested. That would have been earlier in Kristallnacht. And that together with my grandmother and great aunt, he was deported from Berlin to the Piaski ghetto. The phrase at the bottom, which I won't try to pronounce because I don't speak German at all, simply indicates that they were killed. There is no recognition of where or how this may have happened. But my friend Norbert from Großröhrsdorf communicated with a Polish historian of the Holocaust, and he believes quite strongly that both of my parents and presumably my aunt were sent to Sobibor, which was an extermination camp. And because they were in their 60s and deemed no longer economically useful, they were probably murdered on their arrival at that hellish place. Now, I certainly wouldn't say that the story of my family has a happy ending, but I think it has something of a satisfactory ending, I would put that way. On November 9th of 2008, in the presence of my brother, his daughter, my wife, our younger daughter, and myself, the town of Großröhrsdorf, through the work of the three men I mentioned, erected a monument to my grandparents. That monument you see on the right sits on a pedestrian crosswalk just across the street, across the street from the Schonwald department store. Excuse me. It's a beautiful and I think very solemn kind of experience. It's clad in Jerusalem stone, so it actually appears to glow at night. The glass, the monument is topped with a bulletproof glass over a photograph of my grandparents and Norbert's text about what happened to him. Norbert wanted to make clear the violence that was used against Jews and against my family. So he took this bulletproof glass and in 3 or 4 places he hammered it to break it up. Being bulletproof, it didn't scatter. But you can see some of this, for example, in this little circle between my two parents. That's one of the things that was broken in the process. This still stands. There has been at least one case of having it defaced by Nazi slogans, but my friends there got together and within 24 hours, they had restored it to new. So to our family, we don't really think of this as a memorial so much as we think of it almost as the only grave we have for our grandparents, Kurt and Regina. Let me just simply make one other observation. There's a story here about the performance of the play in Gainesville, and another picture of the cover of the book published by Amsterdam Press. But if you're curious about learning more, you can, I would recommend, go to the book's website, which is easily available. The website is simply with the usual URL there, ghostsonthewallbook.com. And you will find there more pictures, more videos about my family, and other material, some of which is not in the book. You will also note, I have to point out, that every page of the website has a link where you can order the book directly from Amazon or other booksellers as you would wish to do.
Well, Ken,
With that,
I want to jump in so that we have time to answer just 1 or 2 questions before the end of the program. And I want to thank you so much for this really, really interesting story. There's one question that came in that I particularly want to ask you, and and we just have a minute, so just a short answer to it. But the question is, you have had such a long career as a political scientist, and this person wonders, do you think this interest was influenced by your family's history?
Thank you. My sense is that very much so. That I think I learned from what I knew of my grandparents' life. And I have to point out, I knew very little until I started the research on this process. Like most survivors, my parents did not talk to us about what had happened. So it took me a while. But I think I came to understand the way religion can interject or it can involve itself in political life because of their experience. And again, have seen where religion or ethnicity or other such qualities often lead to attempts at mass murder, if not at genocide. So yes, I think my interest in that topic really stems from the family's experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm always fascinated about how this history carries on through the generations and continues to affect us in many different ways. I hope people will consider purchasing this really great book or finding it at their library if they're able. It's definitely worth the read. And thank you so much, Ken, for being here today and for sharing this story with us.
It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank everyone for joining us for this last program of 2025. These Lunch and Learn programs, of course, are fueled by all of you, your participation, your questions and comments, and your desire to learn. We have some excellent programming coming up in 2026, including our next Lunch and Learn with Lori Stahl, who you might know as the Executive Director of Music of Remembrance. Lori is also on our Speakers Bureau and will be telling about the survival of her parents during the Holocaust. At the end of January, save the date for Sunday, January 25th, we are thrilled to be partnering with the Seattle Rep Theater for the production of Here There Are Blueberries in commemoration of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And thanks to this partnership, we are offering tickets for as low as $5. More information you'll be able to find on our website in the next couple days or at the Seattle Reps website. And we encourage you to get your tickets early. Thank you to the Gladys Foundation for supporting our Lunch and Learn programs. And thank you to all of our staff at the Holocaust Center for helping to make this program possible, and especially to Cameron Zorb, who's running the tech behind the scenes, who Ken so graciously called at the beginning our tech wizard. And thank you to all of you for your curiosity and desire to learn with us. We look forward to seeing you in 2026. Thanks again, Ken, and thank you to everybody for joining today. This concludes our program for today.